What's up, my wizards? It's Dev from Mtg down there. We like it a magic, and today I've got the weirdest Jeskai list you've seen all season. Here's Jeskai Flash.
Look, see there, I tried to tell you not to test my rage, cause you just a yellow belt and I'm a Jeskai sage. You know the deadly martial arts of the black and the white lotus. Someday I'ma be the POTUS, you'll still be a giant scrotum, and I'll be at the podium and you'll be sodium salty.
Finally got to use that song again. Happy about that, but first things first, just right out on Front Street, fair warning, this is the most expensive deck I'm going to do like all season. I can promise you that, but I'll atone for it on Friday with like a super dirt cheap budget deck. I haven't done one of those in a while, and it's actually really good, but that's in the future. Let's talk about today. It is what it is. This is an expensive deck. Okay, so we're past that. Let's talk about what this deck actually is. You know, these Jeskai historic or Jeskai flash decks have been popping up a little bit here and there the last couple of weeks in the MTGO competitive league results, and they're basically like an evolution of the Red-White Angels deck. But this one goes a step further and does some really, really weird stuff, but I think it's definitely worth doing right now. So let's check it out. Well, first of all, who's your favorite Ninja Turtle? Raph. Actually, he's like my least favorite Ninja Turtle. I'm a Donatello guy myself, but in any case, I just wanted that joke so I could introduce Raph Compassion right here, and Raffy Caps is awesome. I like him a lot more than I like Raphael, actually. Now, like most of these Jeskai historic decks, I'm only carrying 2 copies of Raph because he's actually not the most important card in the deck. You can obviously win without Raph. We're packed with threats. We've got a good long game strategy in this Jeskai list specifically, so we don't actually need, quote-unquote need, Raph to put a game away. Not at all, but especially in the control mirror, Raph is great, you know, and even in the mid-range matchups, Raph is great too. This allows you to take advantage of your opponent tapping out on their turn to do some really disgusting stuff, and against control especially, this allows you to just do stuff at the end of your opponent's turn. You know, often against the control matchup, the first player to act will get punished, you know, and we can kind of keep that from happening, mitigate that by just playing Raph at the end of their turn, and if it sticks, then we can start playing like Lyra Dawnbringers and stuff at the end of their turn, and it's great to have Lyra Dawnbringer. That's why it's 3 whole copies in this deck, because not only is she just as good as she always is, you know, this is one of the reasons the deck can win without Raph, is because we're carrying pieces like Lyra Dawnbringer. But once we do have a Raph out, Lyra is probably the single best instant speed play we could actually make in the entire format. This will just come down during the opponent's combat step sometime and just righteously punish them, you know, or just at the end of their turn, you can get down to Lyra Dawnbringer, and that's incredible. Like, Lyra with Flash is freaking nuts. But again, like, Lyra's amazing even without Flash, right? Like, she'll come down against aggro and just completely swing the game in your favor in just one shot if they can't actually do anything about her. And even against mid-range control decks, you know, she finishes the game in a few bites, she'll catch you back up, she's great when you're behind, and she puts you even farther ahead when you are ahead. The deck doesn't spare on 5 drops. We're also playing 3 copies of Teferi, Hero of Dominaria. I told you, it's an expensive deck, but you know, you pay for power some of the time, and this is definitely one of those times. Teferi is maybe the single best card in the format. He's definitely what a lot of the control decks are completely and totally built around at this point. Even mid-range decks like this one are starting to play Teferi. So let's play it. The only reason we're not playing 4 copies is because I want to make room for 3 copies of Lyra. If you're going to be playing stuff at instant speed, I actually think it's more advantageous to play Lyra at instant speed than it is at Teferi. You know, even if you play Teferi at the end of your opponent's turn, which is a good play, don't get me wrong, or when they tap out to play something, you're just like, I'll respond with Teferi. That's a pretty good play. But you can't actually do anything with Teferi until your next turn rolls around, whereas Lyra Dawnbringer can just destroy a combat step out of nowhere if you can play her with Flash. So I think she's a little bit more important in this deck, so I went down to 3 copies of Teferi. But it's not like we're not playing other Planeswalkers to draw us cards, because we're also playing a couple of copies of Karn in the deck. Yeah, we're spending money. But still, Karn is amazing. We actually have more artifacts in this particular build than a lot of these historic decks have, so we're taking even more advantage of Karn than a lot of these decks do. You know what this deck needs? More money. So we're going to play 4 copies of History Benalia in the deck. Another $100 right there. Again, this is a very competitive deck is all I'm going to say. History Benalia is good, right? I mean, it's a good card, just in and of itself, but this is another card that's kind of like Lyra. You know, it's already ridiculous. It's just a force in this format by itself, but the ability to play it with Flash is great. You know, you immediately get a token out of it so the token can block or something during your opponent's combat step if you play it with Flash. That's fine. It's all well and good, but if you play it like the end of your opponent's turn, then you're essentially getting both tokens nearly immediately. You know, you get the token, you untap, you draw your card, and get a token. So that's also really good. And you're getting to that Chapter 3 technically a lot faster than you normally would. So playing this card with a Wrath on the board is just crazy. But it's good. It's good even if you never draw a Wrath in a whole match. The card is still great to play on turn 3. Now, so far, I've been kind of running through stuff. That's because it's just really expensive stuff that I don't have much more to say about than, like, this is a good card. You know, there's a little bit of tech here and there, that I've gone over. But for the most part, this is what these lists mostly look like. But this is where things take a dramatic turn. Because here's the thing. I was thinking, okay, we need historic cards, playing Rav. We need artifacts, we're playing Karn. So we want to make that card a little bit better, too. We need some form of removal. Because we have a good removal suite, but I'd like a little bit more if we possibly could get some. In a way to remove Planeswalkers and stuff. That'd be nice. And we also need another threat. You know, we need another big threat on the board. So what card fulfills all of those requirements? We're going to play, stick with me here. We're going to play 3 copies of Chamber Sentry in the deck. No joke. First of all, in the fairly late game, you can get this back from your graveyard. Over and over. Like, this gives us a resilient element that this deck did not have before that helps us match up to the Golgari decks. You know, before, a lot of these Jeskai decks are playing 4 copies of Syncopate in the main deck to exile stuff against Golgari and sort of keep up with the flash theme of the deck, the instant speed playability of the deck. But actually, just recently, a Jeskai deck finished 5-0 in the MTGO League results that played 3 copies of Chamber Sentry, and I was like, oh, that's a good idea. So, trying it out, and it's actually crazy. It's no Walking Ballista, but it doesn't have to be Walking Ballista to be a good card. This is a Walking Ballista that it can't take the counters off of itself when it's tapped. It can't put more counters onto itself while it's already on the battlefield. It's not a mana sink, you know, in that way. But Walking Ballista couldn't bring itself back from the graveyard over and over like 4 times in a game. This can. It's a way to win the game without actually attacking into a Settle the Wreckage or, you know, something like that. So that's pretty good right there. You can also take out Lyra Dawnbringers if you're able to spend the full Sunburst mana on it, and you can in this deck for what it's worth. And even if you're only dealing, you know, 3 or 4 damage at a time with it the first time you play it, that's entirely fine. Even if you just play this as a 2-drop, that'll kill, you know, a 2-power creature. Or a 2-toughness creature, excuse me. Or deal 2 to a player, hit a Planeswalker for 2 or something. But attack for 2 in the meantime, that's actually really good. Like, this is a 2-drop. Is not a bad play, you guys. So, I'm telling you, I know Chamber Sentry kind of has the onus of a bad card on it in this format. We all saw that this wasn't Walking Ballista, and we're like, oh, this is bad. But it turns out that in this format where games go very long, matches are grindy, you know, Golgari's a long game deck. These Jeskai decks that are a response to Golgari decks are long game decks. And this card is good against both of those. It's good in both matchups. So I'm telling you, give this card a try. Don't laugh at it. This is a very good card, not only in this deck, but in a deck that has the ability to play it and then get it back later on in the game. I think this card is just good in this format, period, right now. But we do have some artifact ways of making mana in this deck, too, which is fine. You know, they're historic. We can cast them at instant speed if we have a Wrath. Artifacts obviously make the Karn that we're playing even better. So, you know, it's not bad to play artifacts in this deck. So we're going to play 3 copies of Treasure Map to start things off here. Treasure Map can obviously eventually get us a bunch of treasures that will make Karn's ability to make constructs really good. You know, he's just making 4/4s, you know, right then and there. At least. So once we get the 3 treasures, so that's good. But this fixes our mana if we need to. It ramps us a little bit. And it can, you know, obviously help us get Chamber Sentry out of our graveyard and then cast it for all 5 colors of mana if that's what we want to do. But in the meantime, this is a good early game play against control that helps us scry. And, you know, scrying in and of itself is really, really good. As a mana sink, and help us fix our draws and stuff in the mid and late game. So Treasure Map is just a good card in and of itself. It's another one of those cards. It's a good card in and of itself. A lot of these Jeskai decks are playing a creature in the 2-drop slot. You know, they're playing 4 copies of removal and then 4 copies of creature, like Knight of Grace or Dante Vanguard. But I'd actually rather beef up the removal suite a little bit in the early game and play a card that doesn't die to, like, Deafening Clarion or something like that. Or, you know, a Dante Vanguard, we have to pay for life for it to survive. So I'm not 100% sure about playing creatures in this slot, especially when you have access to such good removal. So I'd rather play something like Treasure Map that's good in a lot of different matchups. It might not be great in aggro matchups, but it's good in just about every other matchup. So there's that, and it's got a lot of synergy with kind of what we're doing in this deck. So I want to play at least 3 copies of that, but I also want to slip in 2 copies of Chromatic Lantern here. At first it was 4 copies, and it's not good enough for 4 copies. It's just not. But I went down to 1 copy, but you want to see it more often than that. So I think 2 is the magic number here. This does more than just make Chamber Sentry easy to get out of your graveyard or easy to play, as a 5/5. It definitely does that, yes. But this also lets us ramp into a Lyra Dawnbringer or a Teferi a turn early, and that's actually a really good thing to be able to do too in this format. So I got no qualms with playing Chromatic Lantern. Again, I don't think you need to play more than a couple of copies, but I do think it's nice to have in the deck, even if you're not trying to get Chamber Sentry out of the graveyard at that moment. It's still good for ramping into cards that you need to ramp into, or acting as a 4th land when you didn't draw a 4th land that game. So, I think it's still an important enough piece to run a couple of copies here without really losing too much in the way of opportunity cost. Now, the rest of the deck is all spells, and pretty much all of those spells are removal, because Jeskai obviously has a great removal package. So we'll start with some 2-drop removal here. We're going to play 3 copies of Seal Away, 2 copies of Lava Coil. Now, a lot of these decks are just playing 4 Seal Away, calling it a day, but I actually want a couple of copies of Lava Coil in here. I know we're sacrificing some instant speed playability. But I think this is important against the earlier drops, especially against Tocatli Honor Guard. That's kind of the number one thing. So I don't want Honor Guard to shut down Chamber Sentry. So there's that. I want to work in a couple of copies of Coil here, so I think it's just as good, or in some situations in the early game, better than Seal Away. But Seal Away can still take out like Lyra Dawnbringers and other big stuff in the late game, and that's going to be really important too. But let's move on here to some other removal that we're playing, because I want to play some sweepers in the deck. We're playing 3 copies of Deafening Clarion and 2 copies of Settle the Wreckage in the main here. Deafening Clarion, often a 2 of, but again, I'm beefing it up against the aggro matchup. I wanted to play 5 copies of 2-drop removal and 3 copies of Deafening Clarion instead of the usual 2. And then not play a creature in the 2-drop slot, essentially. So, again, you could kind of fudge things around here and play a creature if you wanted to, but I think it's a little bit more important that we just cover the board rather than play a threat that's going to die to Deafening Clarion. I don't like the line of Knight of Grace, Deafening Clarion. I just don't. But I do like the fact that Deafening Clarion allows us to give our creatures lifelink. That'll be important if we have a couple of Karn constructs or, a Chamber Sentry. That can be very important if we have a Chamber Sentry that we either want to attack with or, sacrifice for damage. So that's cool too, but mostly we're playing this as a 3-mana sweeper that we can control the board and safely get to the mid-game. And Settle the Wreckage is Settle the Wreckage. This gives us an answer not only against really low-to-the-ground aggro decks, it's a great reset button against them, but it also gives us an answer against like Carnage Tyrant, which is really very, very important to have a main deck answer against that right now, I think. And yeah, main deck. A lot of people playing a lot of Carnage Tyrant right now in the main, so I want something to deal with that. This also kills Rekindling Phoenix too, obviously, forever. So a lot of reasons to play Settle, and we've got the space as far as the 4-drops. So I think we could actually get away with playing another 4-drop in this deck. But as it is, at least 2 copies of Settle. Now, we're also playing 2 copies of Negate here, which I am putting in the removal category. This is effectively removal against a lot of stuff, things like History of Benalia, even if you're on the draw, that's great. Experimental Frenzy, that's what I was looking for in my head. That card is very important to negate right now, especially stuff like Planeswalkers too. Vivian Reed, that's important. Teferis, Karns, Vraskas of all shades. There's a lot of important stuff you can counter with a negate right now, starting relatively early in the game. So a lot of these decks will play Syncopate, and I think you could play a 2 of Syncopate in this slot, but this is much better for forcing through plays in the late game against control, which is important. I think that's just as important as making sure that you exile stuff against Golgari, and that's why people are playing Syncopate. But as Jeskai rises up the ranks and Golgari slips the last couple of weeks here, as people are figuring out how to answer it with Tocatli Honor Guard and stuff, people are getting off of Golgari. So I think that Syncopate is getting less and less important, and Negate is getting more and more important. And to finally finish off the main deck, we're going to play a copy of Banefire main deck. And I've actually seen lists on 2 copies of main deck Banefire. Not just Jeskai lists, but a few lists. It's good to have a main deck answer against ironically, the Jeskai lists that are sort of rising up the ranks right now. Jeskai control is finally becoming real. And it's been real this whole time, but it's finally becoming one of the best decks, I think. So with that said, it's figuring out the numbers. And it's becoming a more prevalent deck. So Banefire is just great in the late game against them, but this also functions as a removal piece when you need it to. This can kill everything all the way up to like Lyra Dawnbringer, Doom Whisperer, even in the late game. But if you need something to kill Tocatli Honor Guard or, Golgari Finebreaker, you're not actually, the prevailing wisdom is don't kill Golgari Finebreaker if you don't have to. But exile it if you can. That's another reason why Lava Coil is sweet, by the way. But still, this gives you another way of just killing creatures if you absolutely have to use it for that reason. But it's also just another I win button against control. Now we're playing 25 lands in this deck. We do have some ways of drawing cards. We've got Treasure Map too, to smooth out our draws, ramp us a little bit. We've got Chromatic Lantern, that's ramp, and it fixes our mana. But I still feel like we're top heavy enough to want 25 lands in this deck. Especially with the 3-color base that also needs to incorporate the other 2 colors somehow. We're doing that with Watery Grave and Temple Garden, which still give us blue and white mana for what it's worth. And allow us to get, with the addition of Temple Garden, 18 white sources. We need that for casting History on turn 3 or Settle on turn 4, So usually these decks will play 16 white sources, and I just don't think it's enough, especially to get History on turn 3. I should point out, in the deck that I saw playing Chamber Sentry that was a Jeskai deck, that builder was only playing 1 copy each of Watery Grave and Temple Garden in their deck. So I've actually beefed it up a little bit to 2 copies of each because I think Chamber Sentry is just that important. Never thought you'd hear anybody say that about Chamber Sentry, but true facts in this deck. But here's the sideboard right here. We've got a good mix of stuff that we're doing. Another copy of Seal Away to do with your Kindling Phoenixes and just decks that are going to attack a lot anyway. Seal Away is a fantastic card. We're going to fill out the playset and negate there against control decks. That's a given. 3 copies of Honor Guard with respect to the Golgari matchup. 2 copies of Invoke to Divine against other History Benalias, Experimental Frenzies, and stuff. When they do hit the table, we want to be able to do something about them. So we'll play 2 copies of Invoke. Another copy of Settle the Wreckage for Carnage Tyrants and hardline aggro decks. We want another sweeper. Ixalan's Binding in there against big permanents, Lyra Dawnbringer, Galta, and stuff like that. Doom Whisperer. We can punish them playing big creatures at the top end of their curve, and we can punish Rekindling Phoenix. This is also another answer, by the way, to Experimental Frenzy and Vivian Reed. All of those cards. 2 copies of Nib Mizzet against the control matchups. I actually think that with the historic conceit in this deck, if you have a Wrath down, it may be worth playing a copy of Nib Mizzet in this deck. We're not playing any 6-drops in the main, but we are playing 6 5-drops, so I think we have room maybe for a 6-drop here. And Nib Mizzet would probably be where I'd start, although I'd probably look really hard at the Immortal Sun too if I wanted 6-drops. And maybe even Azor for that matter, but Nib Mizzet will play in the sideboard against control. Nezahal is another consideration. But I really like the idea of Nib Mizzet in the deck, especially since we have Chromatic Lantern. It's fairly easy to get all the mana we need to play it. Aside from that, just a copy of Banefire against Control is a second copy, and then a copy of Cleansing Nova. This is against not only aggro, but again, another answer to Carnage Tyrant. We need answers to Carnage Tyrant, so I'll play another copy of Nova. I'll say another copy. I'll play a copy of Nova for another answer to these hexproof threats and stuff. But now it's time to take a quick look at what we didn't play in the deck, and it's mostly Angels. We didn't play Aurelia, which a lot of these decks will play a 2 or even 3 of. These decks play Resplendent Angel some of the time, usually a 2 of. These decks will play a 1 of Shalai in the main deck. So again, they're like offshoots of the Red-White Angels deck that just adds blue for some counter spells, Syncopate for game against Golgari, but this is a little bit different, obviously. Aurelia is a very good creature, don't get me wrong. I think that that's worth playing. But I don't know that Resplendent Angel lines up very well in this format at all. And Shalai probably could at least be in the sideboard. I'll make a concede for that. But honestly, I just felt that the long game was a better way of playing than having the option of just blowing them out with a mid-game line. But as far as some weird stuff that I didn't play here that you never see in these lists, I actually considered Navigator's Compass. Seriously. This is just 1 mana. Doesn't stretch the mana base. It's an artifact for Karn. You can play it at instant speed if you want to, if you have a Wrath out. And, this makes it to where you can play Chamber Sentry for 4 or 5 different colors a lot more easily. Just tap this, make one of your lands a different land type. So you could do that, and even gains you 3 life to keep you in the game if you do get it on turn 1 or 2, But anyway, here are your power rankings right here. Final score of 67. It better be a high score. This deck is so freaking money. And that power ranking, the power score itself is real too. 10 in power because, again, if we're spending $625, I think it is, on a deck, then it better be a deck full of powerful cards, and it absolutely is. Even if you don't get your chicanery, your trickery off in this deck, and if you don't do something weird with Chamber Sentry in the super late game, you're still just playing a ton of ridiculous cards. But that said, we do have a very good, solid removal suite in Jeskai right now, specifically really in red-white. That we can utilize in the early game in this deck to make sure that we get into the mid game, and then use our sweepers and our stuff like Teferi and Karn, Lyra Dawnbringer to bridge the gap into the late game if we absolutely have to, and then start doing tricky stuff with Chamber Sentry, or just fire off a huge Banefire or something like that. But in the meantime, Lyra can just swing and win for us, So we got a lot of ways of winning the game in this deck. We got a lot of overwhelming lines, even if we don't have History into Aurelia, which is a great line. We still have, History of Benalia, which is a great way to apply pressure against control decks or catch up on board against these, aggro decks and mid-range decks. So again, even though the deck looks tricksy and it looks like it's kind of too cute, most of the cards in the deck are extremely powerful, some of the best pieces in Standard right now. So give this thing a shot, if you can. I know it's really tough. It's hard out there. $625. That is a lot of money. I hear you. So if you have to proxy this up, give it a try. If only to play Chamber Sentry, you could probably play Chamber Sentry in a much cheaper deck than this, yes. But with a bunch of really good cards to support it, the card obviously gets even better. So try this thing out if you possibly can. I promise you it's a ridiculous deck. And not in the, oh, this deck is ridiculous. In the, oh my god, this deck is ridiculous. In that way. So if you want to give it a shot, if you can, again, it's tough out there, but if you can, click the first link in the description down there, and that'll take you over to tcgplayer.com, where you can at least view the deck list. If you're not going to do anything from there, you can view the deck list and, of course, buy any pieces that you need to on their website. They help sponsor my content. They keep the lights on. They're good to you, boy. So help me out by clicking the link in the description, going over there and showing love to your boy. But aside from that, like the video if you got time to do that. I know it's hard to like a $600+ deck, but respect the work and like the video if you possibly can. You got the time for that. Subscribe if you haven't done it yet. Follow me on Twitter at SBMTGDev for all kinds of stuff. Magic talk, and I've also been talking about movies and stuff. I've been doing a lot of weird polls and stuff on Twitter, so jump over there, follow me on Twitter. Throw $1 into the Patreon every month, and you can help pick what decks we do next if you want to see weird stuff like this, or you just want to know what decks we're doing a day in advance. I do that on Patreon too for $1 a month. So head over there, link in the description, and I'm pretty sure I'm tapped out for now. So let me know how you felt about this thing. Can't wait for these comments down there in the sideboard, the comments section. And I will catch you cats later. I'm Dev from the Blaze. Thanks for watching, my wizards. Spread love and be kind.